I'm actually going to go ahead and take a seat because I get to chat on this one. It's very exciting. I would like to welcome Miss Celia Hodent to the stage. She is a gaming consultant and ex-Epic UX consultant. I think I got those letters backwards. Basically, what I'm trying to say is she's really smart. She's way smarter than me. We're going to be talking about unconscious bias. So really, everybody in the place should be in this room because we all suffer from unconscious bias. So if you are listening to my voice either on the internet or if you guys are out in the main hall, please come on in. We're going to have a great chat about some really fascinating things I think we don't really take the time to acknowledge or think about, but thankfully we're having more and more conversations about them, not just in the video games industry, but really across media overall, and really just like in day-to-day life. And hopefully the more we can identify, we can correct and fix and be better humans to everybody.
Hopefully.
Yes.
That's the plan.
Indeed. So Celia, I've had some really fascinating chats with you about unconscious bias and all of the research you've done. You've clearly spoken about unconscious bias several times. For people watching and listening, can you maybe give us a little bit of a rundown about what the phrase unconscious bias means?
Yeah, it's just like the fact that we are not really fully in control of our decisions or our thoughts. And I'm going to take a very small example. If you ever tried to pull a door that needed to be pushed, did that ever happen to you?
Yeah. Happened to me today.
Well, there you go. So that's just an unconscious thing, is because you see a door and you see that there's a handle, and it just affords you to grab the handle and pull, even if there's written push in big letters. So we don't really process the environment very carefully. We have, there's a very great book about that. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman. And he's explaining that we have like two systems in the brain. You have one system that is fast, automatic, that just make split decisions, just like whether I need to push or pull a door. But this system is very prone to biases because it's very fast and we're not really paying attention. You have another system is really more thoughtful and takes care about more things, and it's going to consume a lot of energy in your brain. So that's the reason why we don't use that system most of the time. And that system is the one we need if we need to process information very carefully. But most of the time, we don't. So we fall prey for a lot of these biases, and it's from operating a door all the way to buying something that we did not really need, or if you ever go buy something, let's say that your toaster is dead and you need to buy a new toaster, you look at the options and you might want to just buy the one it's cheap. But then you see another one that's half of the price. It's like it's on sale and it has like a lot of cool functionality that you actually don't need, but it's on sale. So you're like, oh, actually I'm gonna make a good deal if I buy this one. But it's
I feel like you're calling me out specifically here. I fall victim
that happen
constantly.
And maybe this one is actually more expensive than the cheapest one, and you just needed to toast stuff. But you're gonna end up buying a little more expensive one because it's like half the price it should be, and you see like the big price cross and you see the new price underneath, and that's another bias that we have. We always compare things to one another. We don't know how to make decisions just by themselves.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. Well, that's another. It's when you have too many options and then you don't really know which one to take. But that's what unconscious biases are. And if you ever bought games on Steam during Steam sales that you never played, well, you fell prey.
I think everybody in this room probably has done that at least once.
That's another example of these biases. So it's just the fact that we believe that we are very rational beings, and we're making very rational decisions. But most of the time, we are falling prey for a lot of things, and we are blind to that. We are blind to our own blindness, and this is the reason why it's unconscious. So we don't even realize that this is happening.
I think it's so fascinating to take that example that's so simple of the door.
Yeah.
Something that clearly everybody has done at least once in their life, and if you're me, you've probably done it at least once today, like I mentioned. But because we're here at GamesBeat Summit, I would love to talk about some of the research you've done in unconscious bias as how it pertains to video game development specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the big part of unconscious biases in game development is going to be when we try to anticipate how people are going to interact with the game. And so there's a lot of things we need to take into account. We need to take into account the player's limitations in the brain in terms of attention, of memory, of perception. Just doing that is complicated because when we build a game, we know like the game in the back, the back of our hands. So we know everything. We know how to deal with the game. We know what's the elements that are important. But for the player, they don't know that. So that's the main thing. This is what we call user experience. It's all about placing yourself in the shoes of the players and trying to understand how they are going to perceive the game, how they're going to interact with the game, and what they're going to feel about the experience. So some of the main limitations, we talk about perception, attention, memory. Perception is very important. You put a lot of input in your game, and the way you perceive this input is not necessarily the way your audience is going to perceive them, because perception is subjective. It's tied to your expectation, it's tied to your expertise with that sort of games. So there's many things that you believe, like if you're a UI artist, you're going to design a bunch of icons. To you, it means something, but to your audience, they're not going to understand this icon. Or it can be about attention, like making sure like people are not going to be overwhelmed by too many inputs at the same time. The example, I don't know if you've ever seen that game, like the gorilla test, when you have to count the basketball passes from the team dressed in white, and while you do that, there's a gorilla, like a person in a gorilla suit, like passing by, and you don't even notice that. Because when we're focused on a task, we are not able to see something surprising. We are very lousy at multitasking. And this is pretty important in games because games challenge a lot attention. And that's all fine when people are already, the players already know what they have to do. But when you're in the onboarding phase, when you need to teach a lot of stuff to the players, like the mechanics, the controls, the objectives, the systems, if you're trying to teach too many things at the same time, people are not going to be able to even see that maybe there's a pop-up in the UI that's telling them something because they're focused on something else. We also have a terrible memory, so you don't want to rely too much on players' memory. So it's all these little things that we need to take into account when we develop a game. And so that's what UX is all about. And then there's another side. As developers, we make decisions all the time. And what are the right decisions to make? And sometimes we believe that, oh yeah, I'm making the right decision and I know about it because I've been doing that for a long time. But we have to use, to take a step back and to use a more scientific method. So some ways to protect ourselves from our biases so we can make the right decision for the project and not necessarily the gut feeling that we have that sometimes works but sometimes does not. Because again, we have what we call the curse of knowledge. We know the game very well and we know what's important, and so we might not take the right decision for the players who actually don't have all this information. So.
Yeah, no, it kind of sounds like unconscious bias can sometimes overlap a little bit with conventional wisdom. And how people perceive things as one way when in reality they're much different than that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's part of like the bigger Venn diagram happening here.
Well, let's take an example in real life. We have one of the biases called the availability heuristic. It's like
it's called the availability
heuristic. I know it's big words, but it's actually pretty simple. It's that we overestimate events, the likelihood of events that are more available in our memory. So let's say you've seen a lot of horrible things around sharks, and now you're going to think that sharks are pretty deadly, they're very dangerous, and we have to be careful about sharks, when actually sharks don't kill that many humans, and mosquitoes kill way more humans. And I look at the statistics, there are actually more people who died because of deer.
Deer?
Yeah.
Oh no, Bambi's the culprit.
They're more deadly than sharks. But we have that image of sharks being very deadly. So we might make decisions because we have some events that are more available or things that are more available that we can memorize better because they were more shocking. But it's actually not what we need to solve, because the thing we need to solve is actually more silent. So that's the reason why we need to look into it. That's very important when you look into analytics. instead of very rushing into solving a problem that looks the thing that you think it's the right thing to solve, because we also have another bias called the confirmation bias. We have a tendency to look for the information that's going to confirm the things we thought beforehand. So that's the reason why.
Wait, so you tell me that's a bad thing?
That's a bad thing.
No.
It's a bad thing when you're not looking at the whole statistics, and you not carefully weigh the different variables.
No, it's so fascinating you talking about these things, because I don't know if anybody else is feeling seen right now, but I feel like Celia's kind of highlighting some of my character flaws here.
Sorry.
But I think what it speaks to, though, something that you and I were chatting about, is that everybody is susceptible to these unconscious biases. I think a lot of us have some preconceived notions about what that phrase means. We were chatting about at the beginning, and this conversation has clearly taken a turn in a way that I certainly wasn't expecting. So it was interesting because we're talking about how unconscious bias breeds toxicity, not just in gaming communities, which is a lot of what many sessions across GamesBeat Summit have been discussing in a variety of ways, but also how those other types of unconscious biases can breed the toxicity in a very different way than I think we are associating with that word, toxicity, right?
Yes. Usually we don't talk about that term. We talk about antisocial behavior. So toxicity, let's say there's one bias, another that's called the in-group bias. So that's the bias in which you're going to favor the people that you believe are part of your group. So it can be men against women. It can be people living in LA against the rest of the US. It can be Americans against the rest of the world. You have different groups. You're part of different groups. And so in some of the antisexual behavior revolves around that. I'm a guy of a certain age, and this is my in-group, and I don't want you to touch the games that I care about, and so all the people who I don't believe are part of my group, I'm gonna think that they're not worthy or they're not as good. And if it happens that they see one woman one time that is actually not performing the way they wanted, then you have the availability heuristic kicking in, and then you feel that all women are not good at video games. And this is where you start to have stereotypes. And then once you have these stereotypes in place, it's very hard to combat them.
It sounds like these biases are reinforcing each other in kind of a bad way.
Yes, it's like a downward spiral. It's very hard. Actually, we can't combat them. That's the problem. So you have some people, like a very small percentage of people, who are consciously assholes, so that's another problem.
I mean, we all know who they are.
But for most of us, we just perpetuate a lot of stereotypes and a lot of discrimination without even realizing it, because we don't want that to happen, but it's just that we have all these biases and we just need to understand that they exist. So for toxicity, there's an example I love to take as from Genova Chen when he was working on Journey. He really wanted that game to be about people working together and collaborating without being able to really talk to each other. And when he started to do some playtest, initially he had some collision with the characters playing together. And when people did not know what to do and they started to play around, experiment, and they bumped into each other and like, oh, this is something happening. And then all of a sudden they were pushing people off the cliff and people were dying. Like,
it got aggressive, right?
Well, yes, because it was rewarding in the sense where something was happening. But this is not the thing that Genova wanted to happen in his game. So he removed the collision, and all of a sudden, that toxic behavior, that trolling, is not rewarded anymore. So when we talk about toxicity, we need to think about how we design the system and what is it rewarding. Because this is basic behavioral psychology. People are going to do something more if it's rewarded, and do a behavior less likely if it's punished or at least not rewarded. So if we want to see toxic behavior going down, we need to look at what is it we're favoring, even if we don't want that to happen. If you look at mobile games, when you have like the last hit that gets all the XP, well, of course, if you have that design, well, you're going to have trolls who are going to wait for you to,
They're stealing all my XP.
There you go. But that's allowed by the design, and that's rewarded by the design.
Do you think that some of these things happen because the unconscious bias that is so pervasive in all of us that we don't foresee these as outcomes?
Yes.
And I mean, obviously, I guess the short answer would be yes there, right? But I think then it kind of leads to the discussion of like, how do we combat that? Is this something where we have to be more flexible about pivoting after the fact and recognizing like, oh man, that's on us and we need to fix it? Or is there ways that you have found that you're talking with, studios about like, how do we fix it from the beginning?
Yes. The latter. So we need awareness of these biases, and that's a good start, but it's not enough. Being aware of those biases is not going to prevent you to fall prey for these biases. That's the problem. But if you know about these biases, then you can think about the environment that you're designing and try to think ahead, what is this favoring or not favoring, so that when you start, doing your testing, because we do design thinking, so we do play testing and we have beta testing, so we can try to see what's happening. We are able to anticipate a bunch of things ahead of time. Of course, we're going to discover something that we did not plan. It's also the beauty of it. Sometimes it's good things like emergent gameplay. It's something we didn't expect, and it's happening. So that's cool, and we can either do something about it or just let it be. But we need to try to anticipate a lot of things, and we can anticipate a bunch of things. We know that if you have a certain design, we can try to think about, okay, how can people exploit this design to be mean to each other or just min-maxing what they want to do, because most of the time it's just about that. It's not necessarily to be mean to you. It's just because, well, I don't want to spend all my mana. I just want to get the XP. So I'm min-maxing. I'm playing by the rules because it's part of the rules. So we can think about how people are going to min-max using with all the mechanics and all design and the systems, so we can anticipate what's going to happen and hopefully solve it beforehand.
I mean, it seems like a really massive problem to try to take on. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but one of the things that we had discussed about that we wanted to really hit on is inclusion and how there's been so many strides made in talking about how do we make gaming communities more inclusive, particularly starting from the development side and having that hopefully trickle down into the communities of the people who play these games. Yes. And clearly unconscious bias plays a huge role in this.
Yes, so there's two things I would like to tackle in 2 minutes. One thing is that we really want to make games more inclusive. It's important, economically makes sense. Why do you want to exclude some people from playing your game? There was a lot of discussions around the Sekiro and how to make it more inclusive, and some people are like, oh, but I want to beat that game the hard mode. Why do you want to add an easy mode? But being inclusive in terms of accessibility, it's not about adding an easy mode. It's about adding options so that people with disabilities can make sure they can choose some options so they can have the same level of difficulty that you're gonna have, but it's gonna make the game more equal. So it's not about adding an easy mode. It's not about removing something from your experience. It's making sure that it's going to be equitable to everybody and adding more options to do that. So
I think that's such a perfect example, too, because it's so timely, because it just happened, right? And we're seeing people like advocates like Steven Spahn, the COO of Able Gamers, getting out there and really addressing those unconscious biases head on to say, an easy mode for you might be a hard mode for me as a gamer with a disability.
Subjective.
Right, and saying, like, let me explain it to you and break it down where your life, you may never have come across somebody like me who struggles with something like that, and that's just a bias that you had that maybe you didn't identify before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the second part is, if you want to be more inclusive, you need to have diversity and inclusion in your studio. And we also know that diversity is actually making more money. Like companies.
Who would have thought more people can play your game, more people can buy it?
But there was some research like showing a company with diversity generated 19% more revenue on average. So it's not nothing. So to do that, you need to hire more people that don't necessarily look like you. And to do that, you need to have conscious of your biases. Because if you're just trying to hire more women or people from minorities, you're not going to be able to unless you design the environment to not fall prey for some biases. Because I know it's surprising, but even women are going to discriminate and be and look at the application of other women with more scrutiny. So if you want to do that, like for example for orchestras, what they did is they started to do a blind audition. So it's behind a screen, you don't see the musician is auditioning, and this is how they increased drastically, like it was like I think all the way plus 55%. They hired more women musicians in orchestras once they do that. So you need to do blind auditions. You need to design your hiring environment to account for these biases.
I could talk to you for so much longer. We are unfortunately out of time. It's such a fascinating topic that I think would be really great to dive into. So if you guys have further questions for Celia, she'll be out in the main hall. But thank you so much for chatting with me today. And we have one final session, and Tommy's going to come on up and introduce it. So stick around, everybody.
Thank you.
Can you put the slide up?